Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. Our guest today is a music legend, Norbert Putnam, who has worked with notable acts that you may have heard of. Generational acts like Elvis Presley, Chris Christopherson, Joan Baez, Linda Ronstadt, and Jimmy Buffett. Mr. Putnam, I'm honored to have you here today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
I'm looking forward to this conversation, I can tell you. I'm excited. So you and I met about 2 years ago in Muscle Shoals when we had dinner with you and your wife, Cheryl, and it was me and my wife, Kim, and Rick Hall Jr. and his wife, Cindy. So that was
Yes.
a very fun conversation.
Yes.
So you grew up in that Muscle Shoals area, and you played bass on some of the first hits that came from the famed recording studio, which was founded by Rick Hall Sr. How did you first meet Rick Hall and Muscle Shoals?
Well, some of the boys that played on those first records were in our teenage band. At 16 years old, we had an R&B band, and Jerry Kerrigan, the drummer, his father was our manager and drove the station wagon. Okay, and it was me and David Briggs and Jerry Kerrigan, and all three of us became the rhythm section for Rick Hall. Because about the time all this was happening, a fellow here in Florence, Alabama, named Tom Stafford, who was the manager of the Shoals Theater, he stopped David Briggs and I one night as we were leaving, and I said to David, we didn't do anything, did we? Because he'd thrown us out of there before, and he was one of these guys, with the school tie and the black blazer and the gray trousers, and he said, I hear you boys have the best band in town. Well, we probably did, And he said, I'm starting a publishing company. And right here in Florence, Alabama, we're going to record hit songs, write hit songs. And so we thought he was delusional, of course. But after school, we'd go up there. His father was the pharmacist at the Corner Drug. And he had given Tom some office space upstairs. And Tom had a little studio up there. And after school, we'd go up there and do demos. He said, I want you to play on demos. We didn't even know what demos were, but he was signing people. He would sign anybody who could make a rhyme. The songs were awful, but we were learning to play original parts on an original song. When we did James Brown and Bobby Blue Bland and people like that, I would try to learn the bass line off the records. But now we have to come up with something. And so we became pretty good at that. And the second year, we're now 17, the bellhop from the Sheffield Hotel came up the stairs. He was about 6'2", looked like Harry Belafonte, really handsome guy. And he pulled some lyrics out of his back pocket and said, I'm going to sing for you a cappella because I haven't learned to play an instrument. And his name was Arthur Alexander. And Arthur had a great voice. His lyrics were good, okay? And so David Briggs took him out to the piano, and David would look for the chords Arthur was hearing in his head. And it would take 10, 15 minutes. And then Kerrigan and I and several different guitar players would go out and we'd do a demo. Well, we'd done maybe, I don't know, half a dozen or more demos with Arthur. And Rick Hall came up the steps one day to see Tom Stafford. And he played him Arthur. And Rick Hall said something that never been said before. I will raise some money and build a real studio and produce Arthur Alexander. There were no studios here. Why would you have studios here? No one was coming here to make records, right? All the recordings were done at the radio stations, jingles and things like that. So Mr. Hall goes out. Meanwhile, Briggs and I start the school here at North Alabama University. But initially, Rick Hall leased some space in the warehouse over near the Wilson Dam. And we went over there. And Rick had 2 mono tape machines, a little 4-channel mixer. He had 3 cheapo mics, but he found a U-47, a Telefunken, down in Birmingham, that he recorded Arthur's voice on, while the guitar player stood on guitar crates. They were made out of wood in those days. This is 1960, 61, all right? So the guitar player is playing jing, 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 right? He's standing the other side of Arthur's mic. And it's a U47. You can open it all the way around, okay? And so, and Rick had walled off a little control room back there out of the kind of stuff you'd find today at Lowe's. And he had a window, and he'd yell at me, yeah, turn the bass down, you're too loud. I'd turn it down. Oh, turn it up some more. And all he had to do was yell. We could hear him. It wasn't soundproof, you know. And so after a while of moving the guitar cases back, the blend was okay. Arthur's voice was louder than the rhythm guitar. There was one mic over Kerrigan's drum kit, and it was a cheapo crystal mic. Might have cost $10. And when he hit the hi-hat, it distorted in the most beautiful way, like that. and Briggs had an upright piano with a dynamic mic stuck down in it. Rick said that's how Jerry Lee Lewis did it over in Memphis. And me and Terry Thompson, we had our amps in a V shape, and we've got one mic between us. And that's the reason he's yelling at me and doing all this yelling, because I was too loud for the guitar sometimes. And then sometimes, well, it took us about 30, 40 takes before Rick got a balance, because he'd never been an engineer before. And so we were sick of the song, and Arthur, you know, I was thinking, how can he sing all? This is 2-3 hours. And then suddenly we started to do the vocals, and he got it pretty quick. But it took us a day and a half to do 3 songs. Rick Hall got in his car, went to Nashville, ran the tape around. Everybody said, this is a pop record. And the country labels only had promo for country stations, you know. And he bumped into a disc jockey from WSIX. WSIX was a top 40 reporting station. This guy played Dick Clark's playlist from Philadelphia, okay? So I'm not saying there was any payola in those days or anything like that. But this guy said to Rick Hall, he said, now, Mr. Hall, I think I can help you make a deal with Dot Records. They were out in Hendersonville. They had a big star, a guy named Pat Boone, who gave Elvis a run for the money, you know? And so Rick said, well, go do it, because he didn't have anything else on the horizon. So Noel Ball was this guy's name. Noel makes a deal with Dot Records and comes back to Rick and says, well, I want to be co-producer, and I've got a contract for you. And Rick was a desperate man, so he signed it. And we never worked with Arthur again, but the record was zooming up the charts, okay? It made it all the way to the 20s before it slowed down. And it was, and Dot released it in England. There was a young man in Liverpool named Brian Epstein who ran the record shop, and he handed it to a young kid named John Lennon, who had formed a band. And and then everything starts to spread again. The Beatles loved the Arthur Alexander records, okay? And when they got a record deal a year or two later, they called us. They were coming over to do the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night. And then they were coming down to Washington on Tuesday to play a concert at the Washington Arena. And they asked if we would back up the opening acts, which we thought was kind of odd, but we said yes because the money was great. And so that's how we had a Beatles connection, okay, after that. And years later, I did a lot of work with George Harrison. And but that record got, now Rick Hall had enough money to build the real studio that you can see if you ever come. Well, you've been here. You've probably walked through it.
I've been there, yes.
And now it's more of a museum piece. But that was the beginning of it. And David Briggs and I dropped out of college. Now, Kerrigan was a senior in high school when he played drums on that record. And it became important for us to learn to read music. And Kerrigan could already read syncopation. So it wasn't hard for him to adapt to reading 6 staves of a drum part, you know. And 5 years later, we all moved up to Nashville. Nashville was looking for a young rhythm section. But our second record was What Kind of Fool Do You Think I Am by the Tams. And that record started him coming. A fellow in Atlanta named Bill Lowry had a stable of acts, and he brought them all to Muscle Shoals. And After that, Nashville started coming.
Okay. So, how did growing up in Muscle Shoals shape your ear for music and the type of music that you eventually produced and played on?
I'll tell you how it happened. We switched. The first music I ever played was Elvis Presley. My father was an acoustic bass player who actually played on Beale Street when he was a young man, and he came back when he started to have children and got into the insurance business. But he never sold his acoustic bass. And I was 15 years old at a local school here, and some kids came up to me and they said, "We're starting a band to play this Elvis stuff." And it was the early Elvis with Scotty and Bill. And they said, "You're the bass player because no one else in school has one." And "Well, what makes you think overnight I'll be able to learn to play the bass well enough to do these songs?" And Danny Cross, the guitar player, said, "Well, Elvis only uses three chords. Surely the God you can find three notes." And so that's how I began. So I'm learning to go doom chicka doom chicka doom. You slap the bass. Had blisters all over my hand. But the second year we met Jerry Kerrigan, and we dropped Elvis and went straight to Ray Charles, Bobby Blue Bland. James Brown was king, and Jerry Kerrigan's father says that if you'll stick with the R&B stuff, we can play these fraternity parties out at Alabama and over at Oxford and Mississippi State, and that was big money. Okay, $25 a night for each of us. Wow. So on the weekends, 2 nights I could make $50. Well, $50 in those days was unbelievable, right? So we switched over to R&B. Well, first of all, I loved it because the bass lines were good. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, they had a bass player. I stole so much. I shouldn't say so. I learned so much from him, And of course, James Brown was killer too. And so that was the music we switched to. We also did the New Orleans stuff. Ernie Cadeau, Frogman Henry. What was the girl down there did that song called "I Know"? Barbara George, was it? Barbara, something like that. So we're doing New Orleans stuff. We're doing Cincinnati stuff. We'd throw in a little every now and then Chuck Berry, and then as we progressed, we got into some of the New York stuff that was happening. Burt Bacharach, Any Day Now, songs like that, And so we were at that point when Tom Stafford approaches us, that is our musical background. Now, at the universities, that was the only music the kids danced to. They weren't dancing to Elvis Presley and Pat Boone. It was all R&B music, and it was only natural, I guess, that when we started to record, our first hits were all guys that came from that neighborhood, And and after that, one thing led to another. but there wasn't anything socially here that moved us towards that music because when I was 13, 14 years old, I was listening to a lot of Broadway music. I loved Rodgers and Hart and Rodgers and Hammerstein. They were cranking all those big plays out. And later on, that helped me when we got to Nashville, we were playing big band music. Al Hurt would come up. Excuse me. Al Hurt would come up from New Orleans, and we'd have a 50-piece orchestra doing the Great American Songbook. And of course, both Kerrigan and I and Briggs have become good sight readers because there's no rehearsal. You go in there, and the conductor, they hand out the parts. The conductor goes, "Everybody got the part?" And you go, "Oh, yeah, I think we do." "Okay, gang, 3, 4, bam, you hit it." And if you can play it all the way through with great emotion, you could be a studio musician. If you couldn't, you'd never see that guy again. Okay. So that was my life when I got to Nashville.
So who are some of your favorite bass players of all time?
Well, James Jamerson, Detroit. James was a great jazzer, a great sight reader. When Etta James played Detroit, he was in the pit band or in the group. He could sight read anything, okay? And then young Paul McCartney, who had to play bass, played it in a different way, okay? we had a guy down in Memphis named Tommy Cogbill. Boy, did I steal from Tommy Cogbill. You know? And so I had a whole variety of people I listened to. Uh, Nancy Wilson. Nancy had a bass player named Buster Williams. I don't know if you know Buster Williams' work.
Mm-mm.
But see, the other thing is I had to play acoustic bass when I got to Nashville. So I had to keep my bass chops up. And I learned to set my bass up the way Buster did in L.A., you know. And so I was listening. After I started playing, it took about a year and a half before all of us made the top five, okay? All the producers had their top five bassists, top five drummers, top five keyboard, top 25 guitar players, top five vocal groups, and all the records were made live. Everything went to 2-track stereo. And so the deal was you didn't want to play any bad notes. so we didn't play any bad notes.
Was there ever a particular moment when you realized the world had discovered the Muscle Shoals sound?
Well, you have to understand, when we started to make records here, we didn't have a name. We didn't call ourselves the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section because we were Dan Penn and the Pallbearers sometime. We had a Cadillac hearse we'd go out to university with. Okay? But Peter Gurelnik wrote a book about Muscle Shoals, and he called us the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section. We never called ourselves that. And then 8 years later, Jimmy Johnson and David Hood and the guys in '67 opened a studio called Muscle Shoals Sound, and they called themselves the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section. And so there was a little bit of, but you know, I didn't really want to stay down here because we worked non-union pretty much. In order to get people to come here in the beginning, union scale in 1961 was $45 for 3 hours. Well, we would work for 9 hours for $5
Wow.
an hour and sign for a 3-hour contract. Okay, and that happened a lot in Memphis too. Okay, in little towns it happens a lot. But when we got to Nashville, boy, the scale was up to about $55 or $60 an hour, and we were all playing 3 sessions a day, and then 4 sessions a day, and then things got difficult because my wife would wake me at 8 o'clock in the morning. I had a house out near the lake, and she'd have my breakfast downstairs, and I'm in the station wagon at 9 o'clock driving into the city to be at the studio at 9:30 for a 10 to 1 session, a 3-hour session. And I play that, load my instruments back up, go to another studio for 2 to 5, play that, load my stuff up, go to another studio for 6 to 9, and I get home at 10 in the evening. But if Presley came to town, he would begin at 10 in the evening and go to 5 a.m.
Wow.
But I was only 24, 25 years old. You don't have to sleep.
You could probably handle that then.
Oh, I handled it pretty good. My wife didn't like it, though. And my kids didn't like it. They'd only see me on the weekends. And so, but the scales kept going up and the money kept going up. And it was a great job. It was the best job you could have as a player because
Nice.
I could make $100,000 a year and sleeping on bed at some point every night, you know. And I never had to ride on a bus. I never had to play the same songs over and over every night. And I loved creating the bass part. You know, I worked with Tony Joe White on Polk Salad Annie and on J.J. Cale on After Midnight. And what you learn to do as a player, and you play so much, you've got great control of your instrument. Okay, you always had about 5 minutes. I would sketch the song out in shorthand so that I didn't have to rely on my memory, and I would indicate any syncopation. So I've got a roadmap. Now I can just play something that works. And your first idea is your best idea. You don't have time for a second idea. Okay. And that's sort of the way the studio guys were. And it was a great job. It was challenging, but boy, did I get to play with some great players.
Speaking of a great musician, let's talk about Elvis for the next couple of questions. So, how did you first get
Yeah.
connected with Elvis, and what was your impression of him as a musician?
Well, he's one of the greatest singers I ever heard. The guy could sing in tune, okay? But he could also learn a song in about 5 minutes. The first week I worked with Elvis, he booked us for 5 nights. The Nashville studios had agreed with the union they could only book sessions at 10 to 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 9, 10 to 1 a.m. Elvis would book us 6 to 9, 10 to 1 a.m., but we've already played 2 sessions before we get there, right? He came at 8 o'clock. And then he would gather around and he'd say, guys, I got some really funny stories to tell you. And he would tell us funny Elvis stories about the women trying to steal his clothes from the laundry and all that kind of stuff, and sneaking over the fence. And he was a great raconteur. The guy, he had us rolling. And he would get there about 8 o'clock and just entertain us for 2 hours, okay? And then Felton Jarvis would come out. By the way, Felton Jarvis produced our first or second hit record here, What Kind of Fool Do You Think I Am? He was an Atlanta boy. He goes to Nashville and becomes president of ABC Paramount Records, and then ends up at RCA where they give him Elvis Presley. And that's
Wow.
sort of how we got into it. He already knew our playing. But Presley, Felton would come out about 10 o'clock and he'd say, now, Elvis, the boys have already made one session with an hour overtime. They haven't played a note. And we need to do something. RCA is expecting us to get some work done this week. We got 5 nights. And Elvis was great. He goes, well, what are we doing, Felton? And Felton said, well, you said you wanted to do that second gospel album. And you want to do a second Christmas album. Oh, and you wanted to do an album of country standards. And I've got 7 pop tunes. That's 37 sides.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, no way. Well, we'd start around 10, but the king, obviously he did quickly. We could do the Christmas album, the gospel album, and the country standards, okay? We got all that done, and we got 5 of the pop songs done. We got 35 things done in 5 nights, starting at 10 and going to 5 a.m. The average takes were 3. Elvis, with the pop tunes, he would sing along. Get this. They would have a demo for him to listen to. And the 2 publishers that he owned 50% of were there. They had never bothered to send him the songs in advance. And they'd come out and say, now, Elvis, this song is written by that guy, had 5 #1 records in 1 month last year. He's the greatest writer in the world. And they put it on. There's a demo of a guy who can imitate Elvis's voice. And he sings in Elvis's key. And the rhythm section was sort of imitating an Elvis rhythm section. Now it's playing, and we're all writing on legal pads. We're writing a chart for it. The voice would say, and I've been loving you. And Elvis would go, and I've been loving you. Elvis was imitating the guy who was imitating Elvis. We thought that was kind of entertaining, But Elvis would sing it 2 or 3 times, and then he'd look around at us and he'd say, you guys got that? And we'd say, we think we do, King. How's the key? He'd say, what's that? He'd say, David, what was that? Well, that's an F. Take it up a little. He'd give an F sharp. A little more. Take it up to a G. Let's try G. So I'd write my charts out in numbers 1 through 7. Now I put G up there. And all the numbers apply to the scale. Take the G scale. The band would play it back to him flawlessly. He'd go, how do you do that? He said, I've never had a band that could do that. So we would play it one time with him singing it. The red light came on. And here we go. And Elvis had a RE-15 like he used in concert in Vegas on a 50-foot cable. And he's got the RE-15 in one hand and the lyric sheet in the other hand. He's looking at us. He's standing in front of us, okay? And he would start breathing deeply. He goes, now listen, guys, we're going to get this in the first take. And he was like a halfback. Give me the ball. We're going to score. And his first take, a lot of times, was spectacular. He had he didn't have to warm up and do it. He'd get up there and hit it every time. And we realized we were starting to get things on the first take. Now, we've only played it twice. He never said anything to us about the backing track, and neither did Felton Jarvis. Elvis was concerned mostly about his vocal. So we said, we got to get more takes. And Charlie McCoy said, well, let's go in one at a time. If Elvis would go in the control room, he listens once. If he plays it back twice, oh my God, he's thinking of keeping it. We've only recorded it once. So one was to go in there, and Elvis said, hey, Pud. I was Pud. There were no Norberts in Alabama or Tennessee. He'd say, hey, Pud, what's going on? I'd say, hey, King. Oh, we call him King. I said, hey, King, could you do one more for me? I've got a little thing I want to do in the chorus. And Dave, and we're saying, oh, let's do it. He'd run out. Let's do it. So we'd go out, and sometimes he would do 2 or 3 more takes for us. Okay? And he killed it every time. One night, 2 or 3 nights later, I walked in. He goes, looked down at me. He goes, you want to see me do it again, don't you? I laughed. I said, yes. He said, you think this is difficult? Listen, I'm going to do it better. He went back out. He killed it again. He was a really good singer. His pitch was excellent. And boy, he didn't have to work on it. But when he heard that demo, I could see him thinking about it. And he had a lot of voices he could do. He'd go down low. By the way, there was a guy named, what was his name? He was a black singer over in Memphis. And he had a song called, I'm going to hold on tight and don't let go. You're going to hold on tight and don't let go. And and Elvis heard that. And after that, Elvis said, so he stole that. He kind of picked that. Of course, when Elvis did it, it wasn't noticeable. I mean, you didn't really know it. But he had a little boy voice, too, that he would use on a ballad, where he would just be whispering in the mic with this little boy voice like he's talking to his mother or something. He really had a great range and a great arsenal of sounds he could make, I thought. And you know what? After 3 days of playing for Elvis, I'm standing beside him. He hasn't said a word to me. And I said, hey, King. Yeah, Pud, what is it? I said, are you happy with the bass lines? Oh, no, they're great. You guys are so great. He hadn't said a word to the band about anything. He never stopped us and said, I hate the drums. I hate the guitar. I hate the keyboards. We did 35 tracks that week in 5 nights. And he never asked us to change a note.
Wow.
I think maybe he thought, well, my voice on it, don't have to worry about the track.
Yeah, I got this, guys. I'll carry this. So you played with Elvis from 1970 up until his death in 1977. During that last concert, when he recorded Bridge Over Troubled Water, among other things, did you know how bad his health was at that time?
That last year, okay, he booked the rhythm section that played with him in Vegas for the first time to come to the Graceland, and RCA would send a remote truck over, and they'd run cabling in and hang blankets all over the jungle room, and so they were working over there. Now in 1970, I started to produce records, and my first record sold 1 million copies. I did Joan Baez's The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, and it sold 1 million. She normally would sell 100,000. And Clive Davis flew me to New York and gave me some acts, So I got a call from Felton. I was out in San Francisco doing Dan Fogelberg. Dan was a great, great singer, player, writer guy. And he said, hey, Put, could you come down to Memphis? We've been recording for a week and a half, and the rhythm section's already booked to go out with John Denver or something. And if I can get you down here, Ron Tutt can stay, and David Briggs can stay. And so I went over there. And when he came downstairs, I hardly recognized him. He was so heavy, okay? And his face was puffy, and when I worked with him in 70, that body was flawless. There wasn't an ounce of fat on that body. And if you look at the pictures from those days, First album was called "That's the Way It Is" or "That's the Way It Was" or something. He was in fantastic shape. But I always thought when Priscilla left him in '73, I got a call. We're going to record at Stax Studios in Memphis. He's not coming to Nashville. And so we booked out Stax and went over there and did, I think we did 15, 16, 17 songs in like 4 nights. And Elvis, for the first time, came in looking a little puffy. He gained some weight, and he didn't seem to be as sharp as he had been in the past, you know. And but when I saw him, after we only got 1 or 2 songs done in 3 nights. One night he didn't come down at all. He wasn't feeling well, you know. And of course, I had Dan Fogelberg waiting for me out in San Francisco. But I think we got 1 or 2 songs done. And then I didn't see him for a while. And I got a call from Felton Jarvis. And I went at my office in Nashville. He said, "Hey, Put, last night Elvis was in concert somewhere. And he decided he wanted to do that old Righteous Brothers song, Unchained Melody. And he went over and pushed Tony Brown off the keyboards, and he played the piano, and he did a great vocal. He made a piano mistake in the chorus, but he sang the right note. And he said, now I've forgotten who the keyboard guy, one of the top guys. If you could come down in the morning, I've got this guy coming to fix the piano part, and he will play the new part listening to Elvis's part for rhythm, okay? And when that's done, I want you to put a bass part on, and then we're going to write the orchestra like he has on stage in Las Vegas. So I went down there the next morning, and the pianist was just completing the piano part. He comes in, he's signing the card, and I'm plugging into the console. They're going to take me directly into the console, which is sort of the best way to do the Fender bass. And so I'm thumping the bass, and the guy's setting the limiter, you know, and I said, so Elvis, how is the king doing? He said, well, Put, he said, yesterday he had a dozen eggs for breakfast.
Wow.
A pound of bacon, and 16 banana splits during the day. And I said, my God, I said, so it's just obesity? No, he said, it's worse than that. And I said, well, can't someone do anything? Oh, can't you send him to Barbara Ford or whatever the Ford place and dry him out? Betty Ford? And he said, well, some of the guys tried that, and he fired all of them. And he said, we can't say anything to him. And I noticed that, I had noticed that 2 or 3 months before when I went down there for the 2 or 3 nights that he wasn't looking good. But they put the vocal up, and he killed Unchained Melody, okay? I mean, he sounded like he was 20 years younger. And just for that one moment in time, he was soaring on the high notes, you know? And I plugged in, and the beginning of it was all out of tempo, and I'm playing some stuff up high, and then I finally locked in with the pianist and got a part and signed the card. And a few months later, I was taking my kids for summer vacation, and we flew over to Kauai. And I went to Princeville. And my son John was 14, so we're playing golf every day, and the girls are going to the pool, you know. And I came in from golf. My wife said, could you run down to Honolulu and pick up a couple of things for the kitchen? We'd rented the house there. I got in my car, the rent-a-car, and as I drove out of Princeville to go to Honolulu, I turned the radio on, and they were playing one of Elvis's classic recordings. And I thought, they never played him on American radio. American radio is pretty controlled. And I'd heard that there was payola involved, but they weren't putting any of that money on Elvis in the 70s. And as I go across that little bridge to go over to Honolulu, that little one-lane bridge, you've been there, I bet, haven't you?
I have
Uh,
not. No.
well, Honolulu is the prettiest part of Kauai. And as I went across, they back to back, they play another classic. Well, now I'm definitely calling this disc jockey just to thank him, right? And so I park underneath the palm, a coconut palm, and I go in this little general store, and I'm, getting just staples, milk, eggs, bread, and that kind of stuff. And there's a hippie from California in front of me with a backpack. The weather was so good in Kauai that they would climb up in the mountains there, and they would all in the summertime, all the kids are up there with fires going, and he's in front of me, and he gets in front of the cashier, and he's putting his stuff down, and he looked at the cashier, and he said, "Hey, you hear about old Presley?" And I'm right back. The guy said, "No, what?" "He checked out." He checked out.
Wow.
Oh, I grabbed some money, and I just threw it and ran to my car. Turned on the radio, and there it was. And Elvis Presley was pronounced dead at such and such time this morning, and I just thought, I killed him. I thought we all killed him. I thought none of us did a damn thing. Okay?
Mm.
Well, honestly, Colonel Tom knew his condition. He should have protected him. But no one protected the guy, and he was gone like that, just like that, 42 years old. And I sat there and cried like a baby. I still get tears just thinking about it. And I turned on the car, cranked the car. It starts to rain every day at 5:30 on Kauai. And I get the wipers going. And so I'm driving home. And as you know, it gets dark early in Kauai. And I saw a shooting star come across the sky.
Wow.
And I had to pull over. I thought it was him. No, he was special. Also, the only other guy I worked with that had that same sort of aura. I got a call one day to do a television show with Ray Charles.
Wow.
Oh God, Ray! Two great. Those guys, they had the emotion. Ray had it. Elvis had it, and so Ray was coming in to do duets on Hee Haw with Buck Owens. Together again, and so Ray comes in, and Charlie McCoy called me. Says we have to have a more hip rhythm section for Ray. So they were not using the country band on Hee Haw, and so it was me and the young players. And Ray came out before Buck came on, and he said, "You boys know any of my songs?" On almost unison, we said, "We know all of your songs." he said, "Well, after we do this thing with Buck, let's play it a little bit." So Buck comes out and sits there beside him with a microphone, and we did Together Again and one other of those classics, One Take, One Take. Buck runs off to another set, and Ray says, "You boys want to play some of my songs?" We said, "Absolutely. Bet you don't know this one." Well, he started, we fell right in because we played those songs. We were gigging. And Georgia on my mind, we knew all those chords. Well, after the first song, the producer notices what's going on. He starts to roll tape. Ray did 5 or 6 of his classics, and nobody made a mistake, okay?
Wow.
And Ray got excited and got up and started dancing around. He's bumping into lights and cameras, and we had to stop. Okay, but over the years, if they had a show that ran a little short, they would stick one of our Ray Charles pieces into Hee Haw. And it was
Nice.
lovely. I got checks for that for 20 years.
Wow.
So I got to play with all my heroes. It
Wow.
never got
Let's
better
talk
than
about
Ray.
one. Let's talk about one that I know you enjoyed playing with, Jimmy Buffett. And
Oh,
you're the one who sort of came up with his sound for Margaritaville. So first question before we start talking about the music,
yeah.
how many margaritas did you drink with Jimmy Buffett?
if I answer this honestly, the fan club's going to be very angry with me because when I started producing because my first wife left me. She said, "We never see you until Saturday, and you're exhausted, okay? And I want to go back to Alabama." She was from a big family in Alabama. She said, "All this money, and we don't get to enjoy it." No, well, I couldn't quit. I'm now at the height of my playing career, you know? And I said, "Well, whatever you need, I'll send money, okay?" And she had left me. Well, now when I start to produce, the producer gets to choose the schedule, right? And so after Joan Baez gave me $1 million seller and Clive Davis flew me to New York, when the acts came to me, they said, "We want to work with you." I said, "Well, you have to understand, I only work from 11 to 5 every day, but we can get a lot done in 6 hours. And you can make a lot of mistakes if you go 9 hours." And so by the time I got to Jimmy Buffett, Jimmy said, "You only work 6 hours?" Jimmy wanted to work all night. I said, "No." I said, "First of all, I want to hear your songs." All the songs are about the Caribbean, sailing and drinking. Rum was involved. And he'd been to a lot of the islands, you know. And he just had a record out. My friend Don Gant produced a song called Come Monday, okay? And
I
that
love
made
that
the
song, by
top,
the way.
that made the top 20. And that was done with a Nashville studio band. And, and for the first time, Jimmy had enough money to hire a band and tour. So he goes out and he comes back to Don Gant and he said, "Look, I want to use my touring band in the studio." And like most producers, Don Gant said, "Well, has your drummer ever played in the studio?" "Well, no." "Well, if the drummer screws it up, the whole band stops. Okay, if the bass player screws up, they might get another bass player I can punch in my part, you know." And so Gant said, "Well, I'm not doing it. You can find somebody else," like that. And I get a call from Jimmy's manager, who was a good friend of mine. He said, "Would you talk to him? He wants to use his band." And I said, "Well, have him come over." I was meeting some friends for dinner that night in a restaurant on Music Row, and I said, "Come over around 8:30. We'll be finishing up, and you and I can sit at the bar and talk." And he came over, and he said, "I want to use my band." And I said, "Okay, are you playing Nashville anytime soon?" "Well, we're playing here next week," he said. I said, "I will come and see your band, and if I think they can play well enough to go into the studio," I said, "now I may want to bring some ringers." I was already thinking I'll definitely bring a great drummer who'll play percussion in case the guy stumbles. So I go out there. The show was a rock and roll show. It was not a folk rock show. They were hitting it. I loved the show, okay? I loved his guitar player. And none of these guys had been in the studio, you know? And so we meet again. And I said, "Okay." I said, "I've been thinking about this. One of the things a producer has to think about is, especially if the artist doesn't really have a persona yet, is what you can do to make him a little different from everyone else." By the way, old Sam Phillips, who went over to Memphis and produced all those acts, he went to school here in Florence, Alabama. He was president of his 10th grade class. And old Sam always said, no matter what endeavor you're going into, whether you're going to open a restaurant or a gas station, if you want to succeed, don't think you can do it like everyone else. You better have a different slant on it. And I'm looking at Buffett, I'm thinking, your slant may be a connection to the Caribbean and the rum and the sailing. And he's saying he wants to, by the way, I've got a studio now. That's the top studio in Nashville. The second year Neil Young came in and did Keep Me Searching for Heart of Gold, sold 5 million. Next year, Dobie Gray comes in, does Drift Away. That sells a zillion, right? My studio's booked. So Jimmy comes. I said, "Look, I love the band, but I want to take you to Miami." "Well, I want to work in your studio." I said, "Well, listen, it's hard for me to get in my studio." Michael Jackson was in there that week, mixing a Jackson 5 out, 13 years old. I said,
Wow.
"I want to take you to Miami. Let me tell you why. I want to connect you with the Caribbean." And he had said to me he just bought a used sailboat, a Troy Lee Ketch. And he said, well, maybe that'd be pretty good. I could bring my boat over there. I said, great, because I only work 11 to 5. And you can bring your band. I'll rent a big house on the bay. There was a couple of really bright young girls down there started a thing called Home at Last. And they had all these big houses that all the oligarchs around the world owned, right? And I called him and I said, I'm going to have 20 people staying there. She said, well, we got 8 bedrooms, but they could have sleeping bags in the hall. And there is a chef and there's a maid. And so that's how we went down there. Jimmy moved his sailboat over. And Jimmy and I are staying in a hotel, along with the engineer I brought. And I said, here's the deal. We will be at Criteria Studios every morning at 11 o'clock, ready to play. Well, I brought in a percussionist from Nashville named Kenny Buttrey, who was actually the greatest drummer in Nashville, who could play percussion. He was on Simon and Garfunkel records like The Boxer, stuff like that. And I said, Kenny will play congos and shakers as long as your guy's cutting it, okay? Oh, by the way, I'm bringing a guitar player from New York, Teddy Irwin. Teddy Irwin could do anything, okay? He could play all the guitars, all the electrics. He played with Doc Severance's band in Las Vegas, people like that. Oh, and Mike Utley from California came in to Jimmy already had a blind keyboard player who was great, but Utley was a genius at licks. Well, Jimmy had rehearsed his band, except for the 3 guys, right? And we get down there, and we've got 10 songs to do. And we're getting 2 songs every day. I'm letting the guys take their time. And so we go in at 11. By 11:15, band's playing. And his band's playing great. His drummer's playing great. I love the bass player, okay, who then stays for all the records. And so Jimmy and I at 5 o'clock, we'd have a rent-a-car. We had a little Chrysler convertible. We put the top down. We take a cassette. And we would go down to Coconut Grove Marina. We'd crank up the diesel on the Troy Lee, back her out, diesel out, pull her into the wind, and go downstairs was a cassette player. And of course, we'd get a couple of Budweisers. And we'd go down and crank it up and pull her into the wind. And we started to notice the rhythm of the bow coming crashing down as she'd rise up, you know. And Jimmy and I are smiling. He goes, man, I think if it sounds good on a sailboat, if it sounds good, that's going to be what we need to do. And of course, we were drinking a little beer there, and I said, capital idea. and that became sort of a mantra. And 2 or 3 nights, no, it was a morning. 2 or 3 mornings we're having breakfast. And he says, I'm working on another song. And I said, well, you think you'll have it finished? I'm working on the last verse, but I'll try to get it done. I said, what's it called? You got a title for it? Yeah, it's about a night in Key West when I set in with the band. I've been out surfing, and I was just in my shorts and some flip-flops. And coming home, I had a little too much to drink. And I stepped on a beer can and cut my foot. I'm looking at it. The next morning, I'm up and I got some shrimp boiling out on the patio, and I'm trying to find the salt. I'm making them. I think I'm going to call it Margaritaville, which will be my name for Key West. Yeah, a place in Key West. And I said, well, I hope you get it finished. But I hated the title Margaritaville. I'll tell you why. Motown Studio was called Hitsville. By the way, I played for Henry Mancini, great film composer. He wrote a ballad for, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Remember? Okay. He wrote a ballad called Dreamsville. And I thought, well, that's cliche. Everything's Ville these days, you know? And I remember thinking to myself, I hope he doesn't finish that one. He finished it. And about a week later, I didn't see him that morning for breakfast. I get over to the studio, he comes running in. He grabs the guitar. He's got his legal pad. He puts it on on a guitar, on the music stand where the acoustic guitar was, and he starts singing Margaritaville. What a story. Oh, by the time the first verse was done, I couldn't believe it's a movie. It's, you know, MTV hadn't even happened yet, and I'm seeing it's a short film. And being a publisher, David Briggs and I had a publishing company in Nashville, and occasionally I have to listen to the songwriters' compositions. The most important aspect in every short story is conflict. Okay, uh, you can occasionally write a song that's all positive, but as it's going by, we've got all these tourists covered in oil, right? And he can't find it, and I'm hoping that the chorus is going to have some conflict. And he gets to the chorus and he says, "I'm wasting away in Margaritaville." Oh, that's a good start. "Searching for my lost shaker of salt." And then he goes on and says, "Some people claim there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault." Great, we've got conflict, we've got a new story.
And there was actually a process. That's what I love so much about that song. It started out being her fault, and then he said, well, maybe it's my fault. And then by the end, he was admitting that it was his fault.
Well, that last line, we changed it because there was some profanity in it. I've forgotten what he said. It's maybe a yada smile and yada yada fault, And we had to change that line, and we did that when we mixed. That was the only. Everything I did with Buffett, I did live because his first 2 or 3 takes, he's going to hit it. He hit it with motion, okay, and it would get worse. And so I loved it. We were getting everything in 2 or 3 takes, but now we got a new song, and so now the band is about to play the new song, and the drummer, we ran it down twice, and the drums are not happening. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to have to fire the drummer. And so I said, Buffett, can you come out in the hall? So we go out in the hall. I said, Kenny Buttrey's playing percussion. I'd like to put Buttrey on the drum kit. He will know what to do. And I said, would you break it to John? I think John was his name. And Jimmy says, he opens the door and said, John, get your ass out here. And he grabbed John, hit him by the neck. He goes, you're trying to ruin my career. I wished I'd said something to John, right? But Butchie got on the drum kit, and the second take was it, okay? And now we had our hit single. And
it was turning into $1 billion industry. That one Margaritaville restaurants
and all of those, the licks, the piano and clavinet stuff in the intro, Michael Utley. Michael then comes back with me to Nashville, and Michael and I wrote all the orchestration. We had a percussionist, a professional percussionist that came in and did all the steel drums, murmurs, and all that stuff. And then we had a string section with some. Oh, I wanted to have wooden flutes. I wanted the natives down there made recorder type flutes, as well as steel drums. Did you ever hear a steel drum orchestra? I did one day in St. John.
I think I have. I think I have.
The bass steel, it's magnificent, okay? And so we came back to Nashville, and they came up to my apartment, and we drank a half a bottle of champagne, maybe a whole bottle. I wrote all the strings and all the woodwinds and all that stuff, and got it copied and did it the next day. And that became the Jimmy Buffett song, the flutes. Yada da da da. And Jimmy and
that's a great song.
We went. So I did his next 6 albums, I guess, before we sort of lost our rabbit's foot, and Jimmy got, and it's hard to keep coming up with it, and so we sort of played out after 6 years. But I have to tell you, the catalog has been the greatest of all the things I made. Jimmy, of course, Jimmy was kind enough to go out and work every summer and he becomes one of the biggest concert artists. Matter of fact, I was building a studio in Memphis, and I asked the guy there around 2000, a promoter, I said, I noticed you never have Buffett in here. He said, well, you want to know why? He demands $1 million guarantee and all of the gate, and he gives us a piece of T-shirt sales. That's all he pays us. I can get Elton John for $600,000. Okay, I can get. He named all the people he could get. Buffett was he was the highest paid.
Wow.
And for many years, he was the highest grossing artist. Only Paul McCartney grossed more than Jimmy Buffett. And he had 244 fan clubs here in America. Nobody had more than that, you know. So thank you, dear God, for Jimmy Buffett. When he died last year, it really, I shed a few tears for that, you know.
I can imagine.
So of all the artists you worked with, who were your favorites?
Well, first of all, young Dan Fogelberg. Clive flew me up to New York after I did the night that drove Old Dixie Now. And he said, Norbert, I want you to produce all the folkies on CBS. Without thinking, I said, I hate folk music. I didn't hate it. It's just, it was sort of like country music, simplistic. Bass players want complicated chord progressions. You know, I can't play a great bass part to 3 chords. And Clive said, well, now look, he goes, you just sold 1 million copies with an artist that never sells more than 100,000. And you must know something. I said, well, I can do it. I said, but you know, I grew up in Muscle Shoals. It was black singers with horns. And Clive said, he says, I hate to tell you this, I just signed Tom Bell and Gamble and Huff. Well, that shot that out of the sky. I'm not going to beat those guys, right? And so he said, I'll tell you what, I got this kid named Fogelberg. He's 19 years old from Peoria. And he slid a tape across it, those little 7-inch tapes we had in those days. I got this other kid named Eric Anderson. He's sort of the next Dylan type. Norbert, if you will take these things and just do a good job for me, I will make you a very, very, very wealthy young man. And I said, I'll think about that, Clive. That last period might have gotten me, you know. But I came home and I put Dan Fogelberg on. He had gone into a little studio in Peoria and played everything in the band. Only the drums were a bit lacking, but his harmony parts were killer. And the lyrics were grown-up lyrics. And it took a while to get him going, but by 10 years later, we were selling out 15,000-seat arenas. And our last 2 albums, one was called Phoenix and one was called Netherlands, were just spectacular records I'm really proud of. And of course, at this point in time, my phone is ringing to do everybody in the world, you know. And I was doing about 9 or 10 albums a year. And at the end of it, I was about ready to retire. And for the last 35 years, my wife and I have been restoring antebellum Victorian houses around Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama. And occasionally someone will call me to play a bass part. They were doing the Muscle Shoals story. You might have seen the film about Muscle Shoals.
I did, yes.
Well, the original rhythm section, we were called in. And when we said to them that, they said, well, what would you like to work with Rick Hall? And we said, well, we were all learning together. Rick had never engineered, and he would need 30, 40 takes. And we may have needed 30 or 40 takes sometime. And they cut all of that out because they were going to make Rick look like he was the genius who told us what to do. He never said a thing to us other than, can you do anything else? And we would say, well, Rick, can you think of a record with a rhythm section style? And I remember on Arthur's record, You Better Move On, he said, can you make it like the Drifters? Right? And so I go, doom, 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 boom, doom, 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 doom. Right? And so Kerrigan and I just lift that off up on the roof or something, right? And with the jing, 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 jing going on with the guitars, that became our first hit record. And but I tell you, Rick Hall, he really was beginning from the top like we were. Okay, he became a good engineer, a really good. He had great ears, and we got picked up by the Nashville guys. They heard the stuff we were doing, and this shows you how smart the city fathers were in Nashville. They were looking for a young group of guys to come along to work with the young artists. Young artists don't want to work with 40-year-old men, okay? And so we stepped right into that role, and so we had a really good run there. But Nashville, by the time I hit I was doing 600 record dates a year after 5 years, and that means some weeks we would do 20, 22 sessions. Linda Ronstadt, you mentioned her. We had her album finished, and and I was the leader on it and the arranger. And I got a call from Elliot Mays, the producer, and he said, "Linda's found another song. It's better than anything we have. Can you get the band on Saturday?" The wives wouldn't let them work on Saturdays. And we threatened them like my wife did, right? And so I said, "Is it a ballad?" "It's a ballad." Well, I went over and heard the song. I said, "Okay, I can probably get Pete Wade." Pete was a great rhythm guitar player. Well, a great everything. But he lived near me out in Hermitage, in an old 1820 house. And on Saturday mornings, he'd get his riding lawnmower out. I called Pete, and I said, "Hey, Pete, could you come in for 1 hour tomorrow morning? I'll pay you double scale. We'd do one song, then you could be back to cutting your lawn." And so he came into Woodland Studios, and it was just me and Pete and Linda. And I set my bass out. We were seated side by side in some metal chairs. He's playing a rhythm guitar, and they've got a mic on my Ampeg B15. We're not wearing phones, but I get my amp right at the same level as his guitar. And Linda's standing 10 feet in front of us looking at us. And we began. And we knocked out Long, Long Time, which became our first hit. It was in a big movie last year, matter of fact. And and I'm the arranger. So she does it in 2 takes, right? She kills it. So I ran out and put the harpsichord on it, and the steel player put his fuzz tone and did the cello, and they were mixing it an hour later, okay?
Wow. Wow.
And I'm not really a keyboard player, but I could play that part, And that was how Linda got her first hit record.
That's
and it was
awesome.
just in some big movie this last year. I'm waiting for the check,
The question that I always end every episode with, and it's a very general question. What one piece of advice would you like to leave with the listeners on any topic?
Well, I'll go back to any players, okay? It would be your first idea is your best idea. Because I watch players say, "I can do it better," and they would change it up, and it's not better. Well, let me try it again. And you end up wasting a lot of time, And I think that's true if you're writing a book or if you're about to invent a part in it. It's part of a record, And also the guys, when I got to Nashville, that's the way they did it. One day I was playing for Orrin Bradley. I'm filling in for Bobby Moore, who was the greatest acoustic player. Bobby couldn't make one session of an album. So I'm in there with Floyd Kramer, who could, by the way, Floyd could play every lick Ray Charles ever played, backwards and forwards, All of these guys studied all the time, all the contemporary music. And Grady Martin, who was a great sight reader, Owen said, "You take the intro, Floyd, you take the first ending, going back to the second verse. And Nita Kersinger, I'd like to have you come in on bar 16, a 4-part thing," and he'd hit 4 notes on the piano. And Nita would write it out. "Okay, let's play it down," he'd say. Well, we ran it down once, and it was pretty good. He said, "Hey, Grady, you and Floyd swap. Floyd, you play the intro. Grady, you take the first ending." Red light comes on. Floyd Kramer played the most perfect intro that you've ever heard. And these guys could just, and I thought, I'll be back in Muscle Shoals if I make one mistake. So I learned, concentrate. When that light comes on, You better know what you're going to do. I said to old Grady one day, I said, you ever play a bad note, Grady Martin? He was 20 years my senior. Norbert, we don't get paid to play bad notes. Now, you're playing with the elite now. You play a few bad notes, you'll be back with Rick Hall in Muscle Shoals. I just had to ask Grady.
Yeah, that's a great.
They were a tough act, those guys.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a great way to wind up this episode. So our guest today has been Norbert Putnam, music producer, bass player, all-around musician. Norbert, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Now, my pleasure, old pal. Anytime.
I appreciate that. Now, please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today, including a link to how you can get his book. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Haha.
There we go.